Well, we've got a lot of interesting content this week. Firstly, we've got the vote intention. The Conservatives back down to 22%. Labour still riding high on 46%. So not much sign of that Rishi recovery this week. We've also looked at, is Britain working? 57% of the country say no, it's not working. And that actually unites Leavers and Remainers, everyone across the political divide saying nothing is really working in the country anymore. And of course, this was the year of the three prime ministers. We had Boris Johnson, we had Liz Truss, we had Rishi Sunak. So we asked voters, which do you think was the most competent of the three prime ministers? Boris Johnson comes number one, Rishi Sunak number two, Liz Truss number three. I'd love to meet the 3% of voters who felt Liz Truss was the most competent. Among Conservatives, Boris Johnson is ahead by 40 points. His brand is still very, very strong among Conservatives. So lots of interesting stuff regarding politics. And just one other thing, we asked about the Rwanda plan. Obviously, we had the High Court ruling this week, the ruling that the plan is legal. And once again, after a similar question in the autumn, we find that more voters support the Rwanda plan than oppose it. And that is especially true among those Conservative and Leave voters. About 2/3 to 3/4 of those voters say the Rwanda plan, for me, is the right response.
Right, lots of people have been messaging in this morning saying, oh, I want to take part in the poll. Is it on Twitter? What's going on? Just talk us through how you do the research.
Yeah, sure, Rosie, absolutely. So we're drawing our data from a large existing panel of voters across the country, and then we're weighting that data to make it representative of the British population. So this isn't a poll you can self-select into. That brings its own problems. This is a very high quality data source, and we're then adjusting our sample to make it representative of the wider country, and we're asking them questions pretty much every week. So if people have a suggestion for a question they'd like us to ask, please feel free to reach out to me at Twitter, and I'll definitely take that into mind.
Matt, there's something also really interesting in this poll about who can handle the strike. So politically, who's best positioned to take care of this? Yeah. 64% said neither Rishi nor Starmer. 40% of those US said nobody. I mean, is this an indication, Matt, of a complete collapse in the public's faith in our political class?
Yeah, you know, I said something like along these lines last night, actually, on Twitter after having a debate on GB about the public mood. You know, and one thing that I pointed out is, you know, I've been polling a long time, but I've never seen the British people as fed up, as exasperated and as disillusioned as they are today. And the thing is, Martin, in my mind, what I see each week is I don't see really that people think anybody in the current political class has the answer to inflation, has the answer to the NHS, has the answer to the borders and the migration crisis. And we've got a level of disillusionment here that is very palpable. And as you say on this question on the strikes, actually the most popular answer isn't Keir Starmer and it isn't Rishi Sunak. It's none of them. It's nobody in Westminster. And this, to me, reminds me of British politics in the early 2010s, very febrile, very polarizing, people just looking for something new, something different. And at the moment, I think that's why I'm expecting 2023 to be a bit of a bumpy ride again for the main parties in Westminster.
About just for public sentiment as a whole, you know, you've been monitoring how the public feel and sort of taking a litmus test of our opinions on all these big hot topics. You would think at this time we're post the pandemic largely, you know, Brexit, that was very chaotic, but that seems to have been and done. We've now got a prime minister and a bit more political stability, that we should be feeling a little more settled, but you're not seeing that.
Well, Rosie, what we're dealing with is the hangover of that crisis. We're dealing with the economic hangover of COVID-19. We've got debt, we've got inflation, we've got interest rates, cost of living crisis. But I would argue we're also dealing with a political hangover from that crisis. We've got a prime minister who, of course, didn't really win a mandate from party members or from party voters. We've got two political parties that I think it's fair to say are struggling to articulate a vision for the current era that we're in, that neither Labour nor the Conservatives seem to be fully connecting with the country. And then we've got these very specific crises. We've got the border crisis with the Channel crossings. We've got the war in Ukraine, which is further impacting on energy. And so we're being bombarded on all sides. And just one last thing to keep in mind. Remember, a few years ago, somebody said this was going to be the roaring 20s. The good times were back after the chaos of the 2010s and the financial crash. But it turns out in the minds of many voters, actually, what we're looking at is something, a bit like the ruined 20s. Everybody's got a sense the future's going to be a little bit worse than the present, and the present is already a little bit worse than the past. So what we're looking for is some new leadership, I think, in the country, some new optimistic, positive leadership, somebody with some bold answers to get at the root of these problems, from the NHS to the transport strikes.
So, Matt, very quickly, that brings me to my final question. And I follow you on your Substack. It's an excellent read. And I know you talk about this void. Is there room for a new movement? And I know you've spoken about Nigel Farage, the comeback king. Is that vacuum there for real change? Or will people just continue to vote for the two big parties as they usually always do?
Well, the mood is definitely there. We've got a lot of minor parties up again this week in the polls, the Greens, Reform. We've got a lot of people saying, actually, I'm not interested in Labour and the Conservatives at the moment. The challenge those parties face, Martin, is the first past the post system. Unlike the 2010s, we don't have the European Parliament elections now, which, of course, were under proportional representation. We've got first past the post. So whoever's going to sort of run at this system, I think is going to have to do two things. They're going to have to build up a very strong local presence, and they're going to probably have to convince a handful, if not more, of MPs in Westminster to defect. And it's going to have to be a very different strategy from anything that was pursued before, because we've got this very unfavourable election system for new challenger parties.